It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. The Mark Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Mark is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Mark Scaringi.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. I want to welcome to my listeners here on WHP 580 and iHeartRadio. And remember, you can download the iHeartRadio app and listen to the show wherever you are, whenever you like. And if you'd like to listen to prior podcasts of the show or read my bi-weekly columns on Penn Live or take a look at some great merchandise, check out our website at themarkscaringishow.com. And don't forget to subscribe to The Mark Scaringi Show on YouTube and follow me on Twitter at Mark Scaringi or on Facebook. Well, last night we had open borders advocates in cities across the country protesting U.S. immigration policy and protesting the treatment of migrants on the U.S.-Mexican border. The coordinated nationwide protest was named Lights for Liberty. In New York City, Rosie O'Donnell spoke to hundreds and urged her followers and her activists, her fellow Open Borders activists, to take the fascist out of the White House. In Colorado, hundreds of protesters gathered in Aurora to march to the ICE detention facility there in Aurora, Colorado, where illegal aliens are being housed. The protesters removed the U.S. flag, replaced it with a Mexican flag, and spray-painted graffiti on a Blue Lives Matter flag before apparently it was seen flying upside down on the flagpole. Protesters in Harrisburg were a little bit tamer. Penn Live says that 150 protesters attended. The event occurred on the steps of the PA State Capitol. One of the speakers said enforcing proper immigration does not require brutality, said Atika Saeed, a social justice advocate. She also said, we never take democracy for granted. We have seen a thing or two in our lives, and that's why we're here, she said. Sometimes it only takes one wrong leadership to send the nation down the wrong trajectory. Really? Are U.S. immigration policies brutal? The Reverend Sandy Strauss is the director of advocacy and ecumenical research and outreach for the Pennsylvania Council of Churches. And she took the podium and she said, I come here as a Christian. We are called to welcome the stranger among us. Our neighbors are all part of the world community, and we are welcome. Our immigrants do make this country better. Reverend Strauss's Facebook includes a picture of her with the words pro-woman, pro-choice. And I wonder if these tens and perhaps hundreds of thousands of Central American children exercise their choice to leave their homes, neighborhoods, and towns and travel thousands of miles to try to get into a foreign country, a strange land, away from their friends and schoolmates, away from their extended families. These migrant children, they had no choice. Their parents or relatives risked their health and safety and dragged them across Mexico and into the United States in horrible living conditions along the way, without sufficient clothing or food or water. Many are sick and they've contracted diseases and illnesses, and they're living in detention facilities in those Obama cages, and then released into a foreign land. It's a strange place for these children, and it's sad. Thousands of them have been smuggled in by human traffickers. And what about the high percentage of sexual assaults and aggravated assaults and physical assaults on these children? It's truly horrifying. Those parents, had they been American children, would be in prison for child abuse. Yet the Pennsylvania Council of Churches, which is a Christian organization, supports this. And apparently, many of the attendees compared what's happening on our southern border to the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. And that's a completely false comparison. Japanese Americans were U.S. citizens lawfully residing in their home country, the United States of America, not Japan. Today, Hondurans who entered America illegally are not U.S. citizens. They're not residing in the U.S. lawfully. They're here in violation of our immigration laws. We'll talk more about the U.S.-Mexican border crisis when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show. Oh, and welcome back to The Mark Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. Thanks for tuning in today on WHP 580 AM and iHeartRadio and on Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live. We're happy to have you here. And today we're talking about the Lights for Liberty, a series of nationwide protests that occurred last night. We heard from Rosie O'Donnell in New York City. We heard from protesters across the country, including a couple of hundred in Aurora, Colorado, who apparently stormed an ICE facility and they desecrated the Blue Lives Matter flag, and they put up the Mexican flag, which is somewhat ironic, given that they are apparently fleeing persecution in Mexico and south of the Mexican border up into the United States, and making these false asylum claims, seeking refuge in the United States. So it's a wonder why they are proudly flying the Mexican flag. If they're so proud of Mexico and the treatment that they would receive there, one wonders why they didn't stop in Guadalajara or Mexico City or Tijuana or one of the other lovely cities down south. But apparently they came to the U.S., took down our flag, put up the Mexican flag, and here we are today in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's state capital city. We heard from protesters on the Capitol steps last night. Penn Live says about 150 people were there, and we heard from some social justice advocates who were complaining, criticizing that U.S. immigration policy is brutal. And so that poses the question. I wonder if my listeners think that the U.S. Immigration policy on our southern border with Mexico is brutal. You're welcome to call in 717-540-0580 and let me know. We'll put your question or your statement live on the radio, or you're welcome to comment on the various Facebook pages that we have running here. We heard from the director of the Pennsylvania Council of Churches who spoke last night, talking about how our immigrants do make this country better, and we are called to welcome the stranger among us. And she has a photograph of herself on her Facebook with a picture pro-woman, pro-choice, and I'm just wondering if she's pro-child, because we have thousands, tens of thousands, maybe more, of migrant children who are picked up out of their homes and their schools and their neighborhoods in Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala, and they're transferred, trafficked, many of them, travel thousands of miles away from their home up into a strange land and a strange place. They end up in these Obama cages for 20 or 21 days or so before they're released to some relative or someone who can claim them here in the U.S., and then they kind of begin their life in America living in the shadows. And I wonder if if American citizens treated their children. I wonder if I took my four children, my four beautiful, lovely children, on a 2,000-mile hike across the state of Mexico with nothing but the shoes on our feet and the clothes on our back, pulled them out of school, out of all of their athletic organizations, extracurricular activities, dragged them across Mexico and down into Guatemala to illegally cross a couple of national borders and arrive in a strange land, not speaking the language, not having a job, not being able to care for my children, not being able to educate them or provide medicines to them. I wonder what would happen to me. I would probably be locked up, charged with child abuse, but that's not what's happening here. When it comes to Central American migrants doing those things to their children. Democrats in Congress, well, they claim the conditions for the migrant children are a modern-day hellhole, like a 19th century Dickensian London transformed to the U.S.-Mexican border. Now, remember, for 2 years now, Republicans have been screaming on the top of their lungs that there is a crisis on our border. There's a humanitarian crisis, and Republicans have been pointing out these very obvious facts for several years now. They've been saying we can't handle the influx of hundreds of thousands of migrants storming across the border. We don't have the adequate facilities to house, clothe, feed, and apparently we have to now educate and recreate these hundreds of thousands of migrants. The system's overwhelmed. It's overcrowded. Why? Well, because of these crazy immigration and asylum laws. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I want to open up the phone lines. We have several callers in the queue. So let's hear John from York. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
Hey, it's good to talk to you again, sir.
Nice to have you on. Nice to have you on the show. Is the U.S. immigration policy on our southern border, is it brutal?
Well, I think it is too brutal. The question is, what do you do to change it? You'd have to. It's such a complicated, hard situation. I agree with those people that say that we have to treat everybody with God's love and welcome the stranger, and certainly we have to do that. I don't agree with the people that are tearing down the American flag or tearing down the Blue Lives Matter flag and things like that. That's a little radical, I think.
Well, John, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
You know, I understand we have to act through and with God's love.
Yes.
All the time, no question, but God's not paying the bill. The U.S. taxpayers are paying the bill, and we're a little bit broke. And why do you say it's a complex problem? Why can't that beautiful Honduran family stay in Honduras and improve their situation in Honduras? Why do they have to travel 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 miles on foot by bus up through Mexico and into the United States?
Well, there's no question.
Why can't they stay where they are and make their country, their neighborhood, their town, their community, their country a better place in which to live?
Well, that's a good question. The only thing is, they're coming from situations that are life-threatening and dangerous.
Really?
Women are assaulted and
women are assaulted all over America every day.
Oh, yeah, but from where they're coming from, it must be terrible gang violence.
We have gang violence. We have gang violence in Harrisburg. We have gang violence in Pittsburgh. We have gang violence in Philadelphia. Women
not
are
on that level.
Women
probably not on that level.
Women.
And the thing is, for example, the African refugees. Now, I'll just switch to that for a minute. A lot of them come from war zones, and we wouldn't have any clue what that would be like. I mean, we have to help them in some. We have to be compassionate. I don't know. I think we should make citizenship in this country easier to obtain instead of months and years. I don't know what we could. It's a very
well. Let me tell you this, John. We do have a history. We did have war zones in the United States of America. Just about the entire South of the southern part of the United States of America was a war zone from 1861 to 1865.
Oh, sure. Yeah, way back then. Sure.
Yeah. So we have a history of having a horrible, brutal war in the United States of America.
Sure.
So did families in Charlottesville or families in Birmingham, did they flee to Mexico or Canada?
No.
Okay.
But it's just I had talked to some refugees in Lancaster who were at the Church World Service office some time ago, maybe a couple of months ago. They're the nicest people, the best people, and they told you about the horrible wars and hunger and poverty that they came from, and they were all working people, and they loved this country.
Yeah.
And I think if we can see that a lot of these people are hardworking here, they're trying to help
we don't know that,
families.
John.
I don't want to see families separate.
John, we don't know that the 100,000 migrants from Central America are crossing the border every month. We don't know if they're hardworking.
Well, the ones that are here, for example, the Dreamers, I think they should be given the right to citizenship.
Okay.
Because they've been here for a while and they've had good educations, a lot of them, and hard-working jobs. And I don't know. I just think we should look at people who are really trying to help their families, trying to help themselves, even those that are coming across the border down there. We should somehow be able to set them apart.
But they're not refugees. I mean,
they're immigrants.
They're immigrants, and there is
Immigrants,
a big distinction in the law between a refugee or asylee and an immigrant. So these migrants are not immigrants. Immigrants have to follow U.S. immigration law. They have to go through all of the steps that are required by our laws to qualify and become eligible to immigrate to the United States. That's not what these migrants are doing.
Well, do you think sometimes that process is too complicated? Maybe we should reach out and help these people in a quicker way or a better, greater way.
Well, maybe our immigration system and our immigration courts are being overwhelmed because we have hundreds of thousands of false asylum claims being filed monthly. We have 100,000 migrants crossing the border into the United States every month. 99.99999% of them are not here lawfully. They do not have valid asylum or refugee claims. And think about the impact.
I don't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay. Just think about the impact on our immigration court system. It's absolutely overwhelmed dealing with fake asylum claims. So how can we get to the legitimate immigration claims that come in when we're so busy dealing with all these fake claims?
Well, we better sure find a way to do it, because I do think that the detention centers and so forth are too rugged and too rough and too, especially for children and women. I mean, it's just very sad. We could find a way to improve the whole system, I would think, and welcome people in a more compassionate way.
I just wonder.
They are human beings for whom Christ died.
They are human beings, but they are human beings, and they're all children of Christ. But they're not. They're not Americans. They're not United States citizens. They're Hondurans and El Salvadorans and Nicaraguans and Guatemalans and Mexicans, and we love them. We love Mexicans, Guatemala. My God, we do. But is it possible for us to love them in Guatemala or Mexico or El Salvador?
Well, if we would do a lot to maybe send more aid to those countries to improve the conditions in those countries, or do something like that, maybe. But now I hear where we're even cutting aid to those countries.
Well, actually, President Trump just agreed to give another $500 million to another $500 million to the Northern Triangle countries. Under this ridiculous idea that by giving money to those governments, that is somehow
questionable.
Who else are we going to give it to?
Well, I don't. Well, the thing is, I always come back to this sometimes, and I don't want to prolong your things like Church World Service, Catholic Relief Services, people who are there representing the church, or even Jewish agencies or others. These are the ones that are doing a lot of good, and maybe the money could be given to groups like that.
Let me ask you, those groups are making money off U.S. taxpayers. They're being paid for the refugee assistance services they're providing. And once someone qualifies as a refugee or asylee, they are automatically entitled to all federal welfare-based benefits. So the taxpayers are doing their fair share and even more in providing food, clothing, shelter, housing, education, recreation facilities, all on our dime to these migrants who are coming across the border. So God bless the U.S. taxpayer, who, by the way, is broker than broke. Remember, we have a $21 trillion national debt, but $130 trillion in unfunded liabilities to Social Security and Medicare. So we don't even qualify for bankruptcy. We're so broke. We have money to provide food, clothing, and shelter for the good people of Honduras. I think
we should. I mean, I think we should. Yeah.
Amen. Keep spending the money. All right, John from York. Thanks for calling.
Okay.
Appreciate having you call in and call in each Saturday. And we're going to take a brief commercial break. You're listening to the Mark Scaringi Show. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this. And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is the place where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. We're talking about the crisis on our southern border with the great state of Mexico. And last night there were vigils across America, Light for Liberty events, and we even had one in little old Harrisburg, PA last night, and we had protesters standing up and giving impassioned speeches that the American people must be more compassionate, must be more empathetic, must open our doors to the strangers down there on our southern border. And we had a call. John from York called in and is pointing out our religious obligation to take care of all of God's people. And I'm just pointing out some of the financial facts and the legal facts. And I've talked about this before, and I've written some columns on it in Penn Live and the Harrisburg Patriot News and some of those national conservative publications that I write for. And that is the issue of the fact that these migrants, as wonderful as they are technically not refugees or asylees. The fact is they are abusing our asylum laws. They are simply lying to Border Patrol agents when they arrive at the border. They're coached by our friends in the Democratic Party and these liberal advocacy groups and these liberal law firms that go down there and advocate for these migrants. They're told, they're given cards that say, when you meet the Border Patrol agent, you say to that agent, credible fear. So they practice in English, credible fear. They say those words, and those are magical words. You say credible fear, boom, automatically you are given eligibility to become an asylee in the United States of America, and so you can't be turned away. Now, what is the credible fear? You have to have a credible fear. You have to be fleeing persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. Now, the overwhelming majority of these Central American migrants on our border who are requesting asylum, they belong to probably one race. I guess it's the Hispanic race. I'm not so sure. When I was in school growing up, we learned there were three races, but I guess I don't know if Hispanic is a race or not, but I can't imagine they're being persecuted by their fellow Hispanics, so that doesn't really make sense. Are they being persecuted based upon their religion? I assume probably most of them are Catholic. I haven't read one account, and I've read hundreds and hundreds of newspaper accounts. I haven't read one account where they're being persecuted based upon their religion. Nationality. Are the good people of Honduras who have migrated to our border, were they persecuted in Honduras for being Honduran? Obviously, that's illogical. That can't happen. Membership in a particular social group. I haven't heard any of these migrants who are interviewed by CNN and MSNBC and others talk about being persecuted for being a member of a particular social group, or are they being persecuted for their political opinions? Are any of these migrants political advocates or pamphleteers who have written political screeds against the incumbent government, and the government is sending its soldiers out to arrest them and persecute them? I haven't heard any of that. That doesn't exist. That's not why they're coming. When they're interviewed, they will say lavoro. They want to work. They want to work, and that's noble and wonderful, and God bless them. But that's not a legitimate asylum claim. So what they're doing, and they're being encouraged by U.S. citizens who are going down to the border, the Democratic Party, these liberal advocacy groups, they're being encouraged to lie and to say they have a credible fear of persecution. Now, the overwhelming majority of these migrants, once they qualify, they begin the asylum process, they don't show up for their asylum hearings. They just disappear into the heartland of America. They don't come back and participate in the asylum process that they initiated when they came to the border and announced they have a credible fear. For those who actually do pursue their asylum claims, it's anywhere from 80 to 90% of their claims are dismissed because they're false. And that's after years of taxpayer-funded litigation through our court system that all of you, all of my listeners, you're paying for. Now, these false claims, they've overwhelmed our courts. Immigration courts now, according to the New York Times, they have more than 800,000 pending cases. And each case of those 800,000, we're backlogged by 800,000. Each case takes an average of 700 days to process. That's almost 2 years. And again, in the meantime, that migrant is somewhere far from the border and far from the immigration court. So that's the real problem. And as we've talked about, we've got about 100,000 migrants coming each month. That's in the last 12 months, that's more than 1 million people. That's a lot of people. The population of the city of Harrisburg is not even 50,000. So we have two cities the size of Harrisburg comprised of these migrants coming into America each day. And we're not even getting into, because that's a whole other subject, the human trafficking, the smuggling of these coyotes that is going on the border, and thousands of these children are pawns in this human trafficking game that's going on, and there's just, we don't have time to get into all of that. But when we talk about showing love and empathy and compassion for these migrants, and not having strangers here and welcoming strangers into our country, we have to think about what they are doing to our immigration courts and our immigration system. And it's causing a substantial backlog, and it's putting additional roadblocks in the way for lawful immigrants to come into our country because we're so busy going through all of these false claims. Well, that's enough on that issue, and I've talked about that many times. So when your friends and family members talk about the horrible state of these refugees on our border, you can say they're not refugees. They don't fit the definition of refugee under the Immigration and Nationalization Act. They're wonderful, God-fearing people, but they're not refugees. I guess we call them migrants. That's the term that we're left with because they're not immigrants and they're not asylees or refugees. We'll open up the phone lines. We'll take some more calls. We have Philip from Wiccanisco. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
Okay. Thanks for letting me on, Mark. I've
Yes.
got something interesting for you.
Welcome.
I have a gentleman next door to me. I could almost pass the phone to him. I think he's there with his minister. And you know how they're both from Puerto Rico. Okay?
Okay.
His wife speaks Spanish. She doesn't speak any English. His English is pretty good. But I will tell you something, the way he feels. Can you hear me, by the way?
I can, yes. Go ahead.
Okay. So you know how he feels about it?
How does he feel about
He
it?
said about Puerto Rico, quote, unquote. And I'm quoting him very carefully. He said, we're sending too much money over there. They're not using it. We should cut it off. I said, don't you think that's a little cruel? I mean, it's one of our own states even. He said, Philip, we're not getting anywhere with this. Now, that's one person who feels that way. I didn't ask the other gentleman up there because he'd probably agree with me. He says there's a lot of problems in Puerto Rico that aren't being solved. I wish there was some way we could solve it. There's got to be. There's a lot of wealth in Puerto Rico. There is land going unused. They can't sell it. They can sell it, and they get paid to farm it. They get paid to do this.
Well, let me ask you this, Philip, quickly.
Holding on to the money.
Our immigration policies on the border now, would you agree that they are brutal?
You know what? I wouldn't say they're brutal because these people know what they're coming in for. I'd say they're taking advantage, just like my friend next door would probably agree with me on this, and the other one would. I've got people who are from Cuba, same thing. When they got in here the legal way, they started working hard, and they kissed the ground when they came in here. There's no amount of anything you could put them through in this country that would make them change their mind. I think what people need to do is go talk to somebody who's either Cuban, who's either Venezuelan or Argentinian, or any of the other countries who came here legally and ask them how they feel about it. They're going to tell you what their governments were like. And
Well,
they're going to tell you that they don't feel that any of this is brutal.
Well, maybe that's what we'll do. Maybe we'll take the Mark Scaringi show on the road, and we'll go to Argentina, and we'll interview some Argentinians and ask them what they
Actually, you
think.
could just come down to these different cities that have people like my next door neighbor here, who's on my right side. I've got a wonderful, like I say, family from Puerto Rico, and I think his minister's standing out there right now.
Well, we'll have to do that. Hey, Philip, thanks for calling in. Appreciate having the benefit of your views. Now, the president has just announced that ICE raids will begin tomorrow on Sunday. And although there are apparently anywhere from 11 to 20 or 30 million illegal immigrants in our country, we obviously don't know. We have no idea how many illegal immigrants there are in our country. But anywhere from 11 to 30 million, and ICE raids begin tomorrow, but they will only affect 2,000 or so who are subject to deportation orders. So this hysteria about the ICE raids beginning tomorrow will affect only 2,000 of the tens of millions here unlawfully. We'll talk more about this when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show. And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We're talking about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And we're talking about the border crisis that has getting the attention of so many of the American people. We had vigils and protests occur in many cities across the country last night. We heard from celebrities such as Rosie O'Donnell in New York City, who implored her followers and compatriots to take that fascist out of the White House. I wonder who she was talking about. And I wonder how she means for people to take him out of the White House. That sounds a little bit unlawful, perhaps. Maybe deny his reelection or vote him out of office might have been a more appropriate statement for Rosie O'Donnell to make. But she was talking about fascists and fascism, and so she was all ginned up and ready to march, apparently, on the White House or the Oval Office. We heard in Harrisburg, we had the Pennsylvania Council of Churches and some other speakers here imploring us to bring strangers into America, into our homes, and be more empathetic and compassionate toward our friends from Central America. The president, however, taking a slightly different tact, talking today about beginning his ICE raids across the country. We have anywhere from 10 to 30 million illegal immigrants in the country. But apparently this ICE raid will affect only about 2,000 of them, subject to deportation orders. That's a little bit interesting to me because we have about 1 million illegal aliens in total in the country with final deportation orders who've continued to live freely in the United States. So it's not 2,000. We've got 1 million. We have 1 million illegal aliens in the country living here who are subject to final deportation orders that have not been executed. They've not been carried out. So we have 1 million of them here in the country who were required to go home a long time ago and are still here. About 20% of those illegal aliens subject to these deportation orders have at least one criminal conviction. Roughly 60% of them came here from Mexico, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. So it would be kind of like a recycling effort that would occur. We have 100,000 or so coming into the country unlawfully, but apparently we're going to round up about 2,000 of the 10 to 30 million to send them back when we have about 1 million who are subject to final deportation orders and should go. In any event, Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic Speaker of the House, she's imploring religious groups, evangelical Christians who are strong supporters of President Trump and the Trump administration. Nancy Pelosi is encouraging them to call the president, to encourage the president, to implore the president to call off the ICE raids. We've heard from the Speaker of the House Actually, former Vice President Joe Biden is also taking in some criticism. He's receiving some incoming from liberal immigrant advocacy organizations. Now, remember, Barack Obama he deported 3 million illegal aliens during his 2 terms. Barack Obama deported so many illegal aliens, he was given the moniker deporter in chief. His vice president, you'll recall, Joe Biden, is on the campaign trail today with a very different message because the political winds have shifted in the Democratic Party. They've moved further to the left than where Barack Obama was on the issue of immigration. And so we now have a radicalized left wing of the Democratic Party that is pushing the policy of that party. Joe Biden was, just the other day, he was in New Hampshire campaigning. He was confronted by open borders protesters, a Central American, and you have to Google this because it is funny. A Central American migrant, he couldn't speak English, so he had to speak to the vice president through a translator. So this migrant from Central America who speaks only Spanish, not English, he confronts Joe Biden at this political rally. He confronts Biden through a translator, and he says to the former vice president, I want you to apologize to the 3 million immigrants that were deported and separated from their families under the Obama years. I want to know if you will commit to stopping all deportations and detentions if you're elected president. So that's the Central American is speaking Spanish to Joe Biden. And I know many Democratic presidential candidates now speak Spanish. That seems to be the flavor of the political season. Yours truly studied Spanish at the outstanding Franklin Regional High School for 3 years and speaks not really a word of it to this day. So I would be like Biden, a little bit flummoxed by the question in Spanish, but it's translated. Thankfully, the gentleman had a translator there with him. And Joe Biden's response, first he has a big wide smirk of a smile, and then he launches into all of his excuses and his justifications, of course, in English. And he's just speaking and speaking and speaking as Biden does. Now, the guy he's speaking to doesn't speak English, doesn't understand English. And so it's quite comical just watching Biden go on and on and on, and the translator is she's perplexed. She can't really translate because Biden's just going on and on. And so Biden obviously is out of touch. He doesn't understand the man he's talking to, doesn't speak English. But anyway, it's interesting to see the left attacking Joe Biden, who was Barack Obama's vice president for 8 years, because Biden is apparently not to the left enough on the issue of immigration. Now, there are many calls here in the call box, so I want to start getting to these calls. Daryl from Harrisburg, you're on the Mark Scaringi Show. What do you think about the humanitarian crisis on our border? Yes, Daryl from Harrisburg.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, well, there certainly are a lot more people coming to the border than there were, say, a couple of years ago. I may disagree with some of your listeners that I think a lot of them really are fleeing serious adversity because those 3 countries in Central America, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, my understanding is they're quite chaotic.
But remember,
the government isn't good.
Remember, Daryl, the question is,
gangs.
Right, yeah, but are they fleeing religious persecution, racial persecution, political persecution? That's the question under the relevant laws.
Yeah, I think many of them would have a credible fear that they can be physically harmed by these gangs.
Yeah, but that's not the legal test. Well,
yeah.
No, I understand what you're saying, but
yeah.
Can't they stop in Mexico if they're going to be physically harmed in their hometown of San Salvador, for example? Can't they just stop in Mexico and escape the San Salvadorian gang? That's what I don't understand. Why do they need to come to Chicago?
Right. That should be more of a possibility.
Yeah.
I don't really know if Mexico is accepting very many. I would hope they accept some.
Well, they've been transporting them right through Mexico, right up to the U.S. border.
Yeah, and no doubt Mexico could do more. And, I think Trump has said that.
Yeah, Trump has worked on that, and he has his Remain in Mexico policy that apparently the Mexicans are now more supportive of. Well, Daryl from Harrisburg, thanks for calling. Appreciate having the benefit of your views. I want to get a few more calls in here before the end of the hour. Thanks, Daryl. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep, and we have, David from Middletown. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show. Are U.S. immigration policies brutal towards Central American migrants?
No, I don't think so. I think we're treating them as well as we can under the circumstances. And I think the circumstances have been created and contrived, and somebody's bankrolling to pay for these people to be transported up here one way or another. I think, I'm not a conspiracy theorist overall, but how does a person that's that poor get from Central America to the United States of America and get fed and all their needs met along the way? I would love to have the answer to that question. But I also have a comment.
Yes, go ahead.
For all these people that are talking about Christian compassion and being good to strangers, I want to remind them also that in the New Testament that we're taught to obey the laws of the land, except under some very extreme, very limited circumstances. And we're also taught to pay our taxes. Jesus taught that you should pay your taxes in a couple of different places. So my question is...
Well, that's the one. That's the one statement from Jesus Christ that I might disagree with. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
No. My point is, how many of these people that are here illegally are paying any taxes at all? It's an advantage to be hired by somebody and get paid under the table and not have to pay taxes.
You're right, David.
And pay cash.
You're right, David from Middletown. I want to thank you for your call. That's about all the time we have today. Appreciate that. And David from Middletown raises a topic maybe for another show to talk about the total cost of illegal immigration on the U.S. taxpayers. It's massive, and we'll get into that later. Thanks for listening. That's all the time we have. Tune in next Saturday, 1 o'clock.